Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents A Nanny for the Reclusive Billionaire by Regina Kyle. Narrated by Amy Mcfadden. Chapter 1. Mallory Worthington wiped a bead of sweat from her forehead and tied her quarter-zip pullover around her waist. Why hadn't anyone warned her how humid Miami was in June? If she'd known, she would have at least put her hair up so it was off her neck, and traded the jeans and baby blue suede pumas for khaki capris and a cute pair of Kate Spade sandals, which would have had the added benefit of showing off her new pedicure, a shimmery beige pink with the strangely prophetic name Kaza Melted in the Sun. She hoisted her weekender tote over her shoulder and scanned the sidewalk for the car that was supposed to be waiting to take her the 2+ hours to Rhys Dalton's remote estate in the Florida Keys. The guy owned his own island. How much more reclusive could you get? Finally, she spotted a distinguished-looking man with graying dark hair standing next to a Lincoln town car and holding a sign that read Worthington in bold, blood-red script. "Miss Worthington?" he asked as she approached. "Yes." She extended her free hand, but he ignored it and reached for her bag instead. "Is this all your luggage?" "Yes." Much more of this, and she'd sound like a broken record. She raised herself up to her full height, an unimpressive 5 feet even, thanks to multiple rounds of chemo and radiation that had stunted her growth. Normally she wore at least 3-inch heels to compensate, but she'd left most of them at home. She might have learned to work the dining room in stilettos on the rare occasions she turned control of the kitchen over to her sous chef. It was good for morale and helped bridge the gap between front and back of house, and she liked seeing the smiles on the customers' faces. But they wouldn't be much good for chasing an active toddler. "I had most of my things shipped ahead." She preferred to travel light. Plus, if her things were already down there, she couldn't chicken out at the last minute, could she? "Right." He popped the trunk and carefully placed her bag inside before slamming it shut. "Mrs. Flanagan has them waiting for you in your quarters." "Mrs. Flanagan?" "The housekeeper." The recruiter had told Mallory she'd be part of a small staff, all living on site. At least she'd have someone to talk to besides her 4-year-old charge. Her boss wasn't what anyone would call the chatty type, as she'd learned from their brief phone interview. They'd talked a grand total of maybe 5 minutes, presumably because the agency had already grilled her to his satisfaction. "What about you?" she asked the driver. "What's your name?" "I'm Collins, Mr. Dalton's chauffeur, business manager, and general man of all trades." He held the door open. "If you don't mind, miss, we've got a bit of a drive. I'd like to get moving, so we're there before dark." "No problem." She stepped into the car, a blast of cold from the air conditioner hitting her in the face. "And please, call me Mallory." "Yes, miss." He closed the door behind her. "Okay, then. Miss it was." Collins, apparently the man had only one name, like Beyoncé or Ludacris, slid behind the wheel and started the engine. Mallory relaxed into the leather seat, her hand landing on a manila folder beside her. "What's this?" "A little light reading for your trip." "Light reading?" She picked up the folder. "A few things you should know before you arrive." "Like household rules?" "In a manner of speaking." That sounded ominous. The whole interview to job offer to acceptance process had been so fast, there was a lot about Rhys Dalton she didn't know. He'd needed a nanny ASAP to replace someone who left him in a lurch. Not an ideal job for a Culinary Institute of America-trained chef. But she had to get out of Dodge before she got cold feet and wound up spending the rest of her life in the looming shadow of her parents and the disease she'd fought and beaten as a child. Even if that meant a temporary career change and putting hundreds of miles between her and her big sister, who'd always been her best friend and moral support. Brooke had forged a new life for herself. Great guy, great job, great apartment, and it was time for Mallory to do the same. That wasn't going to happen if she stayed under her parents' thumb. Working in the family hotel, living in the family guest house, letting them hover over her like vultures with thermometers, tissues, and Tylenol, waiting for any sign of a sniffle or sneeze. But in her rush to escape, what had she gotten herself into? What if Rhys Dalton had turned angry and vengeful in his self-imposed seclusion, like Heathcliff in Wuthering Heights? Or maybe his wife was still alive, and he had her locked up in his attic, like Mr. Rochester in Jane Eyre. Mallory shook her head. Clearly she'd been indulging in too much Gothic romance. She'd have to stick to Stephen King from now on. Way less frightening. The car pulled away from the curb, and she flipped open the folder and began to read. The first few pages were fairly innocuous. Daily schedule, dietary requirements for Rhys and his son Oliver, emergency contact information in the event of a fire, flood, or alien invasion. Then she got to the juicy part. Okay, Rhys Dalton didn't have a wife stashed in his attic. He was a widower, which was tragic enough on its own. Even worse, he'd lost his wife to a terrorist attack. Mowed down on a busy Manhattan street with 7 other innocent victims going about their daily routine on a crisp fall morning. She closed the file and let her head fall back against the smooth, cool leather. No wonder he'd cut himself off from the rest of the world. And no wonder Collins wanted to make sure she had a better understanding of their boss before meeting him face to face for the first time. "Collins?" she asked, as the chauffeur expertly merged the car onto the highway. "Yes, miss." "How long have you worked for Mr. Dalton?" "Almost 7 years." "So you knew him before—" She let her voice trail off, not sure where to go. What was the politically correct way of saying before his wife was brutally murdered? "Yes, miss." Collins clearly understood what she'd left unsaid, but he didn't elaborate, and Mallory was happy to let the subject drop. Maybe if she got to know the man a little better, she'd pump him for more information. It wasn't that she was morbidly curious. It was more like she felt a sort of kinship with Rhys Dalton, even though she was still hours from meeting him. He'd loved and lost, and so had she. Maybe not a biological family member, but the kids she'd shared the chemo ward with were as close as family. And she'd lain in her hospital bed, helpless, as more than one had lost their battle with cancer, taking a little piece of her with them each time. "I've got cold water up here if you're thirsty," Collins said, interrupting the depressing turn of her thoughts. "I'm fine, thanks." Mallory tried to suppress a yawn. "Feel free to close your eyes and get some rest." "Thanks." She didn't want to admit it, but the stress, heat, and 3 hours on a plane were catching up to her. She tired more easily than the average 27-year-old, something she combated with a daily regimen of pills and potions. Yet another constant reminder of the disease that had come close to taking her life. Almost against their will, her eyelids drooped, and she yawned again. "I think I will." It could have been 10 minutes or 10 hours later when Collins's not-so-subtle cough woke her. "Excuse me, miss. We're at the dock." "Dock?" She sat up and scrambled for her purse. She had a mirror in there somewhere, didn't she? She was afraid to see what she looked like. Probably had hair stuck to her cheek and drool dripping from her chin. The door swung open, and Collins reached a hand into the car to help her out. "Yes, miss. It's only a short boat ride from here to the island." She took the chauffeur's hand and stepped out of the car, the crushed shells that made up the parking lot crunching under the soles of her sneakers. The heat and humidity assaulted her, making her already sweat-stained shirt and wrinkled jeans feel like they weighed 1,000 pounds. Changing into more weather-appropriate clothing would be first on the agenda once she hit land. Again. But the view almost made up for the temporary discomfort. Puffy white clouds floated across a cerulean sky, an almost translucent blue-green ocean, nothing like the murky northern Atlantic waters she was used to, stretched as far as the eye could see. A red and white launch bobbed at the end of a long wooden dock, the outline of an island barely visible in the distance. "Is that it?" she asked, hurrying after Collins across the parking lot and down the dock. "Mr. Dalton's island?" "Yes." He hefted her bag into the back of the boat and jumped in after it. The man was so quietly efficient she hadn't even noticed him retrieve it from the trunk. "That's Flamingo Key." She looked from the boat to the dock and back again, gauging the distance between them. Too far for her short legs to handle. Her hesitation must have been written all over her face, because Collins put a foot on the gunwale and held a hand out to her again. "It's not as hard as it looks," he reassured her. "I won't let you fall." She held her breath, put her damp palm into his calloused one, and stepped off the dock. True to his word, Collins helped her into the launch without incident. Once he had her settled in the back with her bag, he started the engine and cast off, handling the boat as skillfully as he did the town car. He'd left skipper off of his job description, unless chauffeur included land and sea vehicles. Mallory sucked the sea air into her lungs like it was authentic New Zealand Manuka honey and grabbed the rails to steady herself. Her hair whipped her cheeks, and she closed her eyes against the warm breeze and the light spray the boat kicked up as it cut through the waves. This was why she'd left New York. This sense of freedom. From her parents, from the responsibilities of running a restaurant, from her cancer. Too short 10 minutes later, they were back on terra firma, standing in front of an enormous stucco Venetian-style mansion. "Mr. Dalton is waiting for you in the study." Mallory put a hand to her hair, even more of a wreck now after the boat ride. "Can I freshen up first?" "He has a conference call in 10 minutes, and he'd like to see you before you meet Oliver." "Doesn't he want to introduce me to his son?" "Mr. Dalton is a busy man. Mrs. Flanagan will take care of the introductions." Too busy for his own son? This guy was sinking lower in Mallory's esteem, any kinship she might have felt fading like a summer tan in October. Okay, he'd lost his wife, truly tragic, but that meant his son needed him more than ever. With an increased sense of impending doom, she followed Collins up the massive stone steps to the equally massive wood and glass front door. She tried her best to smother her warring emotions, ping-ponging between wanting to make a good first impression on her new boss and wanting to smack him upside the head for putting work before his motherless child. "After you," Collins said, holding yet another door open for her. "The study is the first door on the left." Her stomach flip-flopped. "Aren't you coming with me?" "No, miss." He gestured for her to enter. "Mr. Dalton is expecting you. I have to check the lines on the launch and make sure your room is ready." Great. She was going into the lion's den alone, with nothing but good intentions and a wardrobe that made her look like a reject from one of those Survivor-style reality TV shows. She stalled on the top step. "You're sure I won't be disturbing him?" "Just knock first and announce yourself." Collins ushered her into the cavernous marble-tiled foyer. "Mrs. Flanagan will come get you when you're done." "Thanks." She swallowed hard and willed her reluctant feet to move. Nothing. She could see the study door across the foyer. Those few feet might as well have been 1,000 miles for all the good it did her. "Don't worry," Colin said, lowering his voice. "His bark is worse than his bite." Was it that obvious she needed a pep talk? She did a quick mental tally. Flushed cheeks, dry mouth, sweaty palms, knocking knees. Yep, it was official. She was a basket case, and it showed. "Thanks," she repeated, trying to sound braver than she looked. With a nod, he left. Mallory finally got her feet moving, squeaking across the foyer in her sneakers. When she reached the study door, she hitched her pocketbook up on her shoulder, took a shaky breath, and knocked. "Enter." She had to stop herself from backing away. Collins wasn't kidding about the barking. She hoped he was right about the bite, too. She took another deep, unsteady breath in a futile attempt to calm her jangling nerves, and cracked the door open. The room was in semi-darkness, shades drawn, lit only by a lamp on the impressive mahogany desk that dominated the space. A man stood behind it with his back to her, one hand holding a cell phone to his ear, the other jammed in the pocket of his butt-hugging khakis. "I'll be with you in a minute," he said, lowering the phone. Good thing, or she would have had no way of knowing whether he was talking to her or the person on the other end of the line. It wasn't like he bothered to do something crazy like actually look at her when he spoke. She took the opportunity to study him unobserved while he finished his conversation. He was tall, around 6 feet, she guessed, dwarfing her tiny frame. Inky black curls dusted the collar of his shirt, a shirt that molded his broad shoulders and back as well as his pants showcased his butt. He'd rolled the sleeves to his elbows, revealing tanned forearms with a smattering of fine dark hair. Holy hotness! If he looked as good from the front as he did from the back... Stop! Do not pass go! Do not collect $200! Do not think lustful thoughts about your workaholic, criminally attractive from behind new boss. "I need that report by 5. The object of her lust practically spat into the phone. "And tell Mark I want to talk to him as soon as he's back in the office." He ended the call without so much as a goodbye and tossed the phone onto his desk, turning to face her as he did. Any hope the full frontal view would quash the dirty daydreams inspired by his backside was immediately dashed. The grainy picture in the file Collins had shared with her didn't come close to doing him justice. Whiskey brown eyes, framed by almost obscenely long lashes, patrician nose, strong jawline. It all added up to a mouth-watering package of male physical perfection. Why hadn't she bothered to Google him? Then she would have been prepared for the onslaught of his sheer masculine beauty, if you could ever prepare for something as powerful as that. Or run the other way, as fast as her short girl legs would carry her. "Miss Worthington?" His eyes, dark and appraising, skated over her less than impressive curves, leaving her wondering if the final verdict was desire or derision. Not that it mattered, because she was there to take care of his son's needs, not his own. Or hers. "Mallory," she corrected, her shaky voice betraying the potent cocktail of nervousness and attraction coursing through her system. "There's been a misunderstanding. I thought you were..." His gaze traveled the length of her body again, the journey ending this time in a scowl. "Older." His words were like a bucket of ice water dumped over her head, effectively dousing any flickers of awareness. Probably, no, definitely, a good thing, considering their circumstances. It was practically a cliché, the world-wise billionaire and the innocent virginal nanny. "Is that a problem?" she asked sharply. She was 27, not 17. More than mature enough to handle a preschooler. Heck, she'd run a commercial kitchen, managed almost 100 employees from 16 to 60, some of them no better behaved than your average 4-year-old. Hadn't he read her resume?
I'm afraid so.
He jabbed a button on the intercom on his desk.
Mrs. Flanagan, we are ready for you now.
Mallory shook her head, plastering several damp strands against her cheek, and no doubt making her look even younger. Not helping her cause one bit. She pushed the sticky strands off her face and straightened, maximizing every inch of her 5-foot frame. I don't understand.
I'm sorry you've come all this way for nothing.
He crossed to the door, his powerful strides eating up the short distance, and opened it.
I'll see you get the earliest possible flight home, and you'll be compensated for your time and trouble.
Chapter 2. Rhys let out a relieved sigh as the door swung shut behind the shapely ass of his would-be nanny, his relief almost immediately replaced by annoyance at his right-hand man. What was Collins thinking? Weren't nannies supposed to be kindly, gray-haired ladies like Mrs. Doubtfire? Without the penis, naturally. He slumped down at his desk and scrubbed a hand through his hair. As much as he wanted to blame his assistant, it was his fault, too. Collins might have screened the resumes the agency had sent over, but if Rhys had paid closer attention, taken time to have more than a 5-minute phone conversation with the woman his assistant had picked as the best of the bunch, he would have realized she was all wrong for the position. Beth had been gone 3 years, but sharing a house, even an 8-bedroom mansion with a large terrace, private pool, and 4-car garage, with an attractive single woman under the age of 40, still felt disloyal to her, especially since it was his fault she was dead. He pushed away the guilt he'd fought like a demon every damn day for the last 1,000+ days, and pressed the intercom. Before he could speak, the door cracked open, and Collins stuck his head in.
It's customary to knock.
Rhys released the button. No need for an intercom when the man you were looking for was standing right in front of you.
It's also customary not to fire the new nanny before she starts.
Collins shot back, entering the room fully and closing the door behind him.
News travels fast. Book Miss Worthington on the first flight back to New York and line up some more experienced candidates for me to interview.
Translation: kind, matronly women in their 50s or 60s who smell like fresh-baked cookies and red green eggs and ham on demand. Rhys flipped open the file for his conference call in... He checked his Patek Philippe Nautilus. 5 minutes, hoping Collins would take the hint and consider the subject closed. Instead of following his marching orders, Collins took a seat in one of the guest chairs. So much for taking the hint.
Can I speak freely?
Rhys reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a Darth Vader Pez dispenser. Unlike some collectors, he didn't believe in hiding his treasures on a shelf or behind glass, with the exception of a few especially valuable pieces. A robot Pez dispenser from the 1950s, a pre-1989 Batman Pez in its original packaging, and, his prize possession, a rare Mickey Mouse soft head prototype worth over $7,000. He pulled back Darth's head, and a yellow tablet popped out. Lemon, Beth's favorite. She'd laughed at his obsession with the iconic candy, but eventually she'd come to appreciate the kitschy containers. Hell, she'd bought a good portion of them for him, including the one he held in his hand. He ran a thumb over Darth's helmet as he stuck the tablet in his mouth and sucked on it.
If I said no, would that stop you?
Probably not. Collins smirked. It was a good thing he'd made himself virtually indispensable, or Rhys would have canned his ass, too. He consulted his watch again.
You've got 4 minutes.
You're making a mistake, sending Miss Worthington away.
You don't say.
Rhys leaned back in his chair and crossed an ankle over his knee.
"What makes you think that?"
Collins hesitated, then shrugged.
"Call it a gut feeling."
Rhys had a gut feeling too, but it was telling him the more distance between him and Mallory Worthington, the better. He dropped another candy into his mouth and tossed the dispenser onto his desk.
"Forgive me if I don't trust your gut. It's not like you to dismiss someone without good cause."
Rhys arched a brow.
"Who says I don't have good cause?" "You just met the woman," Collins said pointedly. "What could she have done in the minutes you spent with her to justify letting her go?"
Rhys stood and crossed to the rolling bar cart in the corner. He needed alcohol to get through this conversation. He poured himself 2 fingers of 18-year-old Mcfadden into a tumbler, added an extra splash for good measure, then turned back to his assistant. He could have told Collins to fuck off, that he was the boss and his reasons for sending Mallory Worthington packing were none of his assistant's goddamn business. But shutting himself away from the rest of the world meant there weren't a lot of options when he needed a sounding board. In the 7 years Collins had worked for him, especially in the 3 since Beth's death, he'd become more than an employee. He'd become a trusted confidant, the one person Rhys could rely on to tell him the whole, ugly, unvarnished truth. The one person Rhys could come close to calling a friend. Rhys sat back down at his desk and sipped his scotch.
"We both know why having her here isn't a good idea." "You mean because she's young, attractive, and available? And so are you?"
Rhys wanted to wipe the persistent smirk off his assistant's face.
"How do you know she's available?" "She took this job and moved almost 1,500 miles from the city she called home at the drop of a hat."
Collins leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees.
"I'd say she wasn't worried about leaving anyone behind. All the more reason why she can't stay."
Rhys downed another gulp of scotch, relishing the burn as it streamed down his throat.
"Stop me if I'm overstepping my bounds. Stop!" "But it's been 3 years since the accident." "Beth's death was no accident."
Rhys slammed his glass down on the desk. Scotch sloshed over his hand and onto the blotter, splashing the Pez dispenser.
"It was murder."
"And he was the one responsible."
"She wouldn't want you living this way," Collins persisted. "If you can call cutting yourself off from civilization living."
Damn stubborn man, made all the more annoying by the fact that deep down, Rhys knew he was right. Beth would hate what he'd become. Not that he was admitting it to Collins.
"Look around. This place is practically a palace, not a one-room shack in the middle of the woods. And I'm not cut off from civilization. That's what I've got you for."
Collins narrowed his eyes.
"What about Oliver? Is this what she'd want for him? She'd want him alive."
Rhys tossed back the rest of his scotch, stood, and crossed to the bar cart for a refill.
"I'm doing what I have to in order to keep him safe."
He might not have been able to protect Beth, but he wouldn't make the same mistake with his son, even if it meant making him a virtual prisoner for the time being. Rhys didn't want to think about the inevitable changes as his son grew older. High school, college. He couldn't keep Oliver to himself forever. But he could for now, and as long as possible. Collins let out a long, loud sigh.
"I understand your motivation, even if I don't necessarily agree with your methods." "Does that mean the Spanish Inquisition is over?" "No, but I'll grant you a temporary reprieve. I'll take it."
Rhys poured another generous 2 fingers of scotch into his glass, swirled, sipped, and stared down his assistant.
"Don't you have a plane reservation to make?"
Not one to back down, at least when they were mano a mano. Collins met his gaze.
"You're still determined to send her away?"
Rhys continued to swirl, sip, and stare.
All right.
Colin stood, a little more abrupt.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?